Redfin just put out its numbers for July. About 967,000 people in this whole country are actually out looking to buy a house right now, and that's the lowest anybody's ever counted. Meanwhile, roughly 1.46 million people are sitting there trying to sell one. So if you spent the past couple years hunting for a place and wondering why the whole thing feels like pushing a car uphill, honestly, that gap explains most of it. The version of their report that went around this week put it this way. Sellers outnumber buyers by 51%. Almost 80% of the big metro areas count as buyers markets now. You've got leverage. Slow down, make an offer under asking. There's a window before fall hits. And look, none of that is made up. A buyer's market just means you've got more than 10% more sellers than buyers hanging around. That's literally the definition they're using. Run it that way, and 39 out of the 49 metros they looked at make the cut. Miami's got 154% more sellers than buyers. Nashville's right there behind it. Nobody's spinning anything. That's just how the division comes out. But the gap formed differently this time. Normally a market swings toward buyers because sellers turn up. Builders finish houses. Families put their places on the market. Supply climbs. And all of a sudden, you've got choices. Power changes hands. Everybody sees it happen. Here the number of sellers dropped too. About 1/3%. Down to the lowest it's been in a year. The gap got bigger because buyers cleared out faster than sellers did. So this leverage buyer supposedly picked up over the summer. Nobody won it at a kitchen table haggling over price. You inherited it from the people who quit and went home. Now you'll say, okay Dave, but the company that put this out called it good news for buyers. And they did, that's true. But read the actual report, and there's a line sitting right in the middle of it that quietly takes the legs out from under the headline. Their words. It's only a buyer's market for people who can afford to buy. That one sentence is basically this whole video. Because that record low we're talking about isn't measuring how many people want a house. It's measuring how many are still standing in the room. So let me walk you through what pushed everybody else out, because it's not some mystery and there's no bad guy in it either. Start with the mortgage rate. Freddie Mac's weekly survey has the 30-year fixed at 6.67% this week. And get this, that was a drop. First one in 6 weeks, after 5 straight weeks of it climbing. A year ago, that same rate sat at 6.58%. So after all that noise, you're worse off than last summer by about 9 cents on every $100. And everybody's out there calling it relief. What it does to a household is pretty simple. The typical monthly housing payment in this country is running around $2,626 right now. That's up roughly 2% from last year. On a page, fine, whatever. But stack that on top of prices that are already sitting at record highs, and it becomes the difference between the bank saying yes and the bank saying, well, almost. Picture what that actually looks like at the table. 2 people who did every single thing right, saved for years, cleaned up the credit, sat out the crazy bidding wars on purpose, walk into a lender's office in August and find out they qualify for less house than they did last August. They were still being responsible with money. The math moved underneath them. And there are hundreds of thousands of households in exactly that seat, which is the whole reason that buyer count reads the way it does. So why did the rate keep climbing all summer? To understand it, look at the decisions behind it. The Federal Reserve's rate setting committee has kept its benchmark rate in a range of 3.5 to 3.75% all year long. They held it again at the July meeting, and the vote was 9-3. 3 of them wanted to move. Most people still haven't caught up to how the argument in that room has changed. The debate over when to cut has given way to a debate over whether to raise. The thinking goes like this. The conflict with Iran has kept energy prices up, and energy feeds into the price of basically everything you buy. Consumer prices in July were running about 3.4% above a year earlier, well over the 2% the Fed says it's shooting for. What the Fed's protecting is its credibility, because if investors stop believing it'll defend that target, long-term borrowing costs climb on their own no matter what the Fed does. What's holding it back is the job market, which has been getting softer. Raise rates into a weakening job market and you might cause the exact recession you were trying to dodge. Calling that a conspiracy gets it wrong. People are making a genuinely hard call while staring at a lousy menu. But from where you're sitting, the outcome's the same either way. Mortgage rates follow long-term bond yields, not the Fed's short-term rate directly. And bond yields have been drifting up all summer because investors are pricing in the chance of higher rates for longer. Betting markets right now put the odds of at least one increase this year at roughly even. That's a forecast, not a fact. Nothing's been decided. But it's why the 10-year yield won't come down. And it's why your mortgage quote won't either. If this channel's useful to you, subscribing genuinely helps it get in front of more people trying to sort this out.
Now let's get into where the pressure's actually building, because it is not spread out evenly at all. Second group of decisions, the sellers. New listings just hit their lowest point since October 2024. Homeowners are choosing not to sell, and honestly, you can see why. A ton of them are sitting on a mortgage from 2020 or 2021 at half of today's rate. Moving means handing that back. What forces their hand is just life. A divorce, a job transfer, somebody dies, a baby shows up. None of that waits around for the Fed. So the people listing right now, more and more of them aren't optional sellers. They're the ones who have to move. And that's a completely different animal, because somebody who's just testing the market can pull the listing and sit tight. Somebody who has to be out by October cuts the price. Then there's a third group, and this one explains why the map looks so strange. Look at where the seller surplus is worst. Miami, Nashville, Houston, San Antonio, Austin. Those are the places where builders and investors made a whole set of decisions back in 2021 and 2022, when money cost almost nothing and everybody was moving south. And from where they stood, it made total sense. People were showing up, rents were going up, borrowing was cheap. So they built and they bought. The problem shows up now. A finished house costs money just to hold on to, right? Taxes, insurance, interest on the construction loan, all of it ticking. In Miami especially, insurance premiums and homeowners association fees piled on top of everything else. So that inventory has to move, and it's landing in a market where the local buyer got priced out somewhere around 2023. Those decisions made sense under the conditions in front of them. The conditions just change faster than you can build a house and sell it. And you can already see what that does. You can see exactly where, too. Mavoda looked at active listings across 17 major metros and found more than a third of them, 35.4%, were already sitting below their original asking price. In 16 of those 17 markets, the listings getting cut most often were the cheap ones. In West Palm Beach, nearly half the entry-level listings had already been marked down. Tacoma and Fort Worth right behind it. But the deepest cuts in actual dollars are happening at the top. In Orange County, California, and out in Nassau and Suffolk counties on Long Island, the typical high-end markdown ran around the $150,000. Down at the bottom, the cuts are constant and small. Up at the top, they're rare and enormous. Two different things are going on at once. A starter home world where sellers keep shaving the price week after week, trying to find anybody who still qualifies, and a luxury world where one guy with cash can pull a six-figure concession out of a seller because there's nobody standing in line behind him. Which brings us to who's actually winning this thing. The winners are the people whose purchase never depended on a mortgage rate to begin with. Cash buyers. Move-up buyers carrying equity out of a house they bought years back. In the 6 metro areas that are still sellers' markets, and most of those sit around New York City, where they've restricted construction for decades, home prices went up about 4.2% over the year. In the 39 buyers markets, prices went up 2.3%. Read that again, because it's backwards from what you'd expect. Where there's the least competition, prices are climbing slowest. Where buyers are still fighting over houses, prices keep going up. Scarcity's still winning. It just moved to a different zip code. And who pays for it? 2 groups, and you know people in both. First one's the person who was going to buy a starter home this year and can't. They got quoted a monthly payment and walked away before the offer stage or any bidding war. Second one's less obvious, and it's the seller at the bottom of the ladder who has to move. They own a modest place in a metro where half the cheap listings already got marked down. Their buyer pool is precisely the crowd that just vanished. They're chasing the last few qualified buyers in their price range, trimming the price every few weeks, watching deals fall apart on them. And deals are falling apart. About 14% of home sale agreements got canceled recently, which is the highest share since 2023. Inspection turns something up, somebody gets cold feet, a buyer spots something better down the street. In a normal market, that number's just noise. Right now, it's telling you the buyers who are left are fragile. Now let me be straight with you about the other side of this, because there is one, and it's real. Pending sales. That's houses under contract but not closed yet, the earliest read you get on demand. Ticked up 0.4% in the first week and a half of August. Mortgage applications to buy a home rose about 3% in a week. And nationally, the share of listings that have taken a price cut is running just about where it was a year ago, around 41%, against roughly 42% last summer. So slightly fewer cuts, not more. If you want to argue nothing's breaking, you can make that case with real numbers. I just point out what those numbers actually are. One is a rounding error on a single week. The other is a national average, sitting on top of a market that's split clean in two. So what would make this turn into something bigger? Demand's been weak for 4 years, and prices held anyway. A market comes apart when weak demand runs into sellers who can't afford to wait. Right now, most sellers can wait. They're not even listing. That's the floor under prices, and it's the honest answer to why your rent went up while home prices didn't come down. The real question is what happens to that floor. It comes down to a handful of things you can actually keep an eye on. Watch the weekly mortgage rate. It comes out every Thursday. It's been hanging just under 6.7%. The level that's historically choked off sales isn't much above that. Watch new listings in your own metro. Right now, they're near multi-year lows. If listings start climbing while the buyer count stays flat, that means the sellers who are waiting have stopped waiting. That's the one that matters most. At the September Fed meeting, watch whether the committee signals it's more worried about inflation than about jobs. That's what moves bond yields, and bond yields are what set your mortgage. Watch the share of price cuts on starter homes where you actually live. That national number is an average of a market behaving in two completely opposite directions. If 3 of those 4 start moving the same way at once, you're looking at something different from what we've got now. If they don't, you're still looking at a long grind. The headline says buyers have the upper hand. What that number is actually counting is how many people are left. Those are not the same sentence. You're standing in a market where the price of admission moved, and roughly 1 million people is now the entire crowd that can still pay it. Knowing which 4 things to watch is worth more to you right now than any prediction anybody hands you, mine included. If this helped, go ahead and subscribe. I go through the numbers every week.